Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever it might be. Had some great presentations. I particularly enjoyed John's presentation. And if you're listening, John, I hope you don't mind. I'm going to quote you a few times during the course of this presentation. Now, I've called it the Viagra of Virality, which I can't even say very well because of the alliteration. And I guess some of you might be thinking, well, what a funny title. Some of you might be thinking, what a stupid title. The point is, it's probably produced a reaction, either positive or negative. And producing a reaction is one of the themes of this presentation. And as John said earlier, when it comes to marketing, neutrality is the enemy. And I think we'll come back to that. Now, the other point about this title is it contains a couple of metaphors, Viagra and virality, and metaphors are crucial to our understanding of this subject. Now, naturally, I'm not going to be talking literally about a cure for erectile dysfunction, because it wouldn't get through the spam filters, nor will I be talking about biological viruses. But clearly what we're doing is we're using one as a metaphor for how ideas spread, and the other as a metaphor for power or potency, which is itself a metaphor. Okay, so what is virality? Well, at its simplest, virality is about sharing. It's about two people sharing an idea or a thing. Once it's shared, it becomes a social object. Get a lot of people talking, sharing, copying, replicating, and it becomes viral. So our question today, really quite simply, is what transforms objects into social objects? Now, it's an obvious point, but a vital one, that viral ideas need a social response in addition to an individual one. We might react positively to an idea, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to share it. Plenty of things we might see that we like, feel quite warm about, doesn't mean that we're going to go out and tell people about it. And I'm going to quote John again, but how you feel is the best predictor of what you'll do. And I think that's what you're going to see during the course of this presentation. Right, well, how do ideas spread? Firstly, is it people who spread ideas? I mean, that seems to make sense. I mean, you've got people who talk about ideas. And, you know, if you've read the work of Gladwell, The Tipping Point, or Keller and Barry, you know, they talk a lot about influencers, people who have a disproportionate influence on whether people adopt or copy ideas. And, you know, that is what seems to happen. My view is it's a slightly linear, mechanical, and possibly a bit too rational view of what actually goes on. So I'm going to propose a contrary view, that it's not so much the people that do the work, it's the ideas that do the work. And this, I think, has echoes of a theory called memetics, or more specifically, memes. Now, the reason I think memes are important, and I'm going to quote Richard Dawkins here, who's the guy who actually created the concept, is that memes exist to replicate themselves. He calls them units of cultural transmission, analogous to genes, that are copied and passed on, almost without us being aware of the process. And a very good example of that is Obama's campaign slogan 2008, "Yes, we can," repeated, copied, replicated, spread around the US and the rest of the world millions and millions and millions of times. You know, that's a meme. If we look at this year's presidential election, did we get any memes? Well, there were a few. One of them quite unintentional. Mitt Romney misspoke, as they say in America. I love that term, to misspeak. And I think we say put his foot in it. I think that's probably what we say over here. When he talked about binders full of women. Wonderfully evocative phrase. Now, that went viral. He didn't want it to go viral, but it did. It was picked up on because there's something, you know, implicitly sort of funny and strange about it. And it probably says something about his state of mind. I don't know. I'm not making a political point. Interestingly, the Obama team tried to create a meme, and they call it Romnesia, which didn't go viral at all. Kind of doesn't surprise me. It's a bit of a play on amnesia. Not quite sure about that one. Now, why am I talking about memes? Two reasons. Firstly, that memes stop us thinking in terms of autonomous individuals who go shopping in the marketplace of ideas. So we stopped thinking so much about people choosing ideas, and we turned to a more radical alternative, which is we start thinking about ideas that go shopping in the marketplace of people. And really what that does is to start us focusing on the properties that viral ideas possess. Okay. Now, my company does market research and stuff on emotions and virality and social effects, and we've measured a wide range of viral objects on both sides of the Atlantic, for marketing companies, for media companies. Some of this is self-funded work. So I've kind of pulled all that work together, and we've looked at a very wide range of different things: personalities, product launches, some brands, some events like the Royal Wedding, the Olympics, and so forth. And we've created a measure of buzz or virality, and we based it on what we call the water cooler moment. Because, you know, the important point about virality is it's not just about social media. Remember, virality encompasses broadcast, print, audio, word of mouth, people talking over the proverbial garden fence. So our metaphorical measure of virality or buzz is the water cooler. What we ask people to show us is how much they think an idea is being talked about by other people, which is, again, an extension of what John talked about earlier, going from me to we. Because people are very good judges of what other people think and what other people are talking about. It also produces hard quantitative data, as you can see from the distribution there, running from 1 to 10. And just to give you an example of some of the output, we can quantify the volume of buzz, and here you've got a whole range of viral objects that we've quantified in terms of their talkability or buzz, ranging from the Royal Wedding at the top, which was measured just before the nuptials in 2011, to surprisingly right at the bottom, the Diamond Jubilee, which happened this year, but which wasn't a particularly viral event, not at least a few days before. But I think what's more interesting is when we actually start to look at the intensity of buzz or virality. And again, what we can see there is the percentage of people right at the top end, the ones who move, you know, the buzzometer right to the extreme. And you can see the Royal Wedding there, 50% of people in the top box. A couple of other things talked about, World Cup and the Olympics. And there's one other there, Jimmy Savile. Probably haven't heard of him if you don't live in the UK, but I'll explain who he is. But essentially, there's three things there that are talked about for mostly positive reasons, and one thing there which is talked about for mainly negative reasons. Now, what have we learned from looking at all these viral or social objects? Well, one of the key things is that we've learned that when people talk about viral ideas, memes if you like, they use metaphors. They use metaphors like attraction and repulsion. They talk about being drawn magnetically towards something. They might say it's irresistible. They might say it repels me. They talk about energy and momentum. They talk about an idea that's really going somewhere, spreading like wildfire, being on the up, running out of steam. All of these metaphors share a common characteristic. They're all about force. And a very influential professor of cognitive linguistics, he's a Hungarian, I'll try and pronounce his name, Zoltán Kovács, apologies if you're in Hungary and that sounds terrible, believes that force is a super metaphor for emotions. And essentially, he puts it very simply, emotions are forces. If you don't believe me, listen to this. I was seized by emotion. I struggled with my emotions. I was gripped by emotion. I was overwhelmed by emotion. It hit me hard. I was swept off my feet. We talk about emotions constantly in terms of a force that acts upon us, an almost palpable, physical, natural force. So the Viagra of Virality, I knew I was going to struggle with that title, the Viagra of Virality is emotion. But we believe it has to be intense emotion, either positive or negative. Now, if we look at these two pictures, on the left we've got a picture of the Royal Wedding. As you saw earlier, hugely viral event, very much talked about, mostly for positive reasons. People felt good about that. They felt warm, they felt close to this lovely couple getting married. On the right, and again, you won't recognize this guy if you don't live in this country, in the UK, called Jimmy Savile. Now, you might find this hard to believe, but this guy was one of the most famous and highly paid media presenters, TV presenters of the 1970s and 80s. Hugely popular, drawing in audiences of 20 million plus on a regular basis. Since his death recently, it's emerged that more than 300 people have brought allegations of child abuse against him. So we have a situation where someone has gone from being, a minor deity in media terms to really a complete and utter reprobate, an outcast. The point is, people feel strongly about each of these. They talk about each of them. Savile is one of the most talked about things in the UK at the moment, but for negative rather than positive reasons. And this is the important point. Now, to test this hypothesis that virality is driven by extremes of emotion, we need, firstly, something that measures or captures emotional extremes. We also believe it has to tap into the metaphors that underlie the phenomenon of virality. Now, a slight sales pitch here. We have an approach that we've developed called metaphorics. I'm going to talk very briefly about that, which is a non-verbal and metaphorical tool which measures emotional engagement and viral buzz. Okay, the importance about it here is that because it is non-verbal and metaphorical, we find that it captures the extremes of emotion much more effectively than either semantic or numerical scales. And I'll show you some examples of that in a moment. Because viral objects polarize emotions. And these are some results we've got from some from the US, some from the UK, responses to different personalities. And we use a particular metaphorics measure here, which is called proximity. Politicians typically polarize response. And you can see, in the case of Obama, we got this extreme polarity. Lady Gaga polarizes response. Simon Cowell polarizes response. Tiger Woods too, although most of it negative. The point about these measures is that they do get to the extremes. When we try and replicate these using verbal or numerical scales, we don't get a shape like this. And this is what excited us so much when we first developed metaphorics. Okay, if we want to deconstruct virality, what we need to do is two things, or one thing rather. We need to take high levels of virality and we need to regress it to the extremes of emotional reaction. Which probably doesn't make a lot of sense, so I'll show you a picture. So if we take the distribution of buzz for Obama, I'm going to take the top end, the 8 to 10s, could take the very top if you want, but we can correlate that with the two extremes that we saw earlier in terms of how people feel about him. And we've done that across a whole wide range of different metaphorics and verbal measures to come up with a kind of predictor of virality, taking buzz as the dependent variable and trying to see which of the independent variables drive it best. And what we come out with time and time again when we run this is that the things which are most predictive of virality are excitement, energy, proximity or empathy if you like, sense of inspiration. When we try and predict virality using verbal scales, even when they try and replicate the metaphors, because all of those top ones are actually non-verbal metaphorical measures, we seem to struggle to get a significant relationship, even if we say excitement or inspiration. So can we take this one stage further and extend it to advertising? Well, John showed this earlier, and I'm going to repeat it. The 2007 Binet and Field study, which looked at about 800 cases IPA effectiveness award that were submitted, where what they did essentially was to divide those awards into those that seemed to be based primarily on a rational persuasion model, and those that were based on an emotional model. And they've taken here the subset, which they believed were based on a fame model. What they meant by that were ads that were essentially there to get people to talk about the brand. And I've shown some examples below. There's the gorilla ad, which has been talked about ad nauseum at various conferences, but it's a very good example. There's one in the middle there that, again, probably people outside the UK might not recognize, the meerkat character there. Now, this was a campaign for a previously relatively little known insurance price comparison website called Compare the Market. And somebody thought, well, how about making our brand spokesman a meerkat called Alexander? Let's have him talking in a Russian accent, and let's have his brand called Compare the Meerkat. And that was the basis of the campaign. One of the biggest viral successes we've seen in advertising terms. Now, we were fortunate enough to be tracking this campaign, actually not for Compare the Market, but for one of their competitors. And within about a week or so of this going on air, we started to pick up this incredible buzz around it, very, very early on. And this is the metaphorical inspiration measure that we track. So 43% were giving it, top box scores. Right across the board on our metaphorics measures, everything was going right off the scale. So we were able to tell our client very, very early on that this was going to be a blast. And we've done an exercise looking at, similar to what we did with the viral objects that we saw earlier, looking at what are the best predictors of viral potential. And again, it's very much about extremes of emotion, but because most advertising works to a positive emotion model, it tends to be the top end that is the strongest predictor. Now, I'm going to say very quickly, not exclusively, because there are exceptions to that, but most times advertisers are not trying to create negative emotion. They're trying to create positive emotion. So it's probably not surprising that the things which are most predictive are when you get a 10 on excitement, or a 10 on inspiration, or a 10 on happiness. And those are the three things which are the biggest drivers. So it looks like you need some excitement, you need some inspiration, you need a bit of happiness too, you need some engagement. But we also see, I think interestingly, that some of the verbal attributes come through a bit more strongly here, and some of these are useful predictors. The ad inspires me, the ad makes me want to watch it. It's very important because that's a measure of involvement. Makes me want to buy it, not quite as strong a predictor. And right down at the bottom there is told me something I didn't know, which doesn't seem to be a particularly strong predictor of ad virality. So I've just listed those numbers at the top there. You can look at those in good time. But below, what I've done is just a simple correlation exercise, a linear correlation exercise, where I've just looked at the relationship between some of the verbal descriptors, verbal scales there, and the ad virality measure. And what we see is that very, very strong correlation between ad virality and involvement and inspiration, also empathy. Call to action, new information are pretty low in terms of their predictive power there. So just to summarize that, because we believe, both metaphorical non-verbal scales and verbal scales can be of use here in terms of helping us to predict things. Excitement and inspiration are the key. A slightly weaker driver, but important one, is happiness. And on the verbal side, inspiration and involvement. Involvement does seem to be very, very important here. And what's less important seems to be new news and also a call to action. So again, the rational information doesn't seem to have such an effect here as the non-rational, which again is pretty consistent with what John was saying earlier. So I guess, as a final point really here, what I'm saying is that viral ideas recruit us. And they recruit us by provoking extremes of emotional response, either positive or negative. Time and time again, we find the best way to predict virality, or viral potential at least, seems to be to look at the extremes. So you have to have something that does that. Now, we claim that we have, and I think, we have validated that. And please look at our website and you'll see some of the papers I've written for SMR where I've explained how we've done that. So I feel that we have got an approach that works effectively in this case. What we've identified, I guess, are 3, possibly 4 things as key, which again are no surprises, but, let's concentrate on these for a moment. Excitement, energy, empathy, which I think is probably the more surprising one here. This feeling of closeness and identification with the idea is really important, either positively or negative. If you love or hate something, the chances are you will probably talk about it. Quote John again, neutrality is the enemy. Inspiration, if you're an advertiser, is key. And got going to be an exciting new year for us because we're working with one of the big social media companies. I know there's not too many to choose from, so I'll keep it unbranded. One of the big social media companies to create a platform where advertisers can place their ads, and essentially people will go view these ads, click through to a metaphoric study, and what we're going to be able to do is validate some of this stuff in terms of actual viral outcomes, and take some of these ideas that we've got about predictivity of viral phenomena and actually apply them essentially to things which have become viral. So I think it's going to be an exciting time for us, and we're really looking forward to that.